Welcome to Silent Queen's Rise. Now let's go straight into the story. Miriam had been laughing. That was the detail. Solène Marchetti kept returning to as she sat in the dark on the bottom stair of her own front porch. The October rain driving sideways across the manicured front lawn of the house her husband believed he owned. Not crying, not embarrassed, laughing. A loose, wine-bright laugh. The kind a woman makes when she has decided she has already won. Solène had heard it through the kitchen window as she was walking back from the car with the dry cleaning. 2 weeks' worth of her husband's pressed shirts draped over her arm, the plastic crackling in the wet wind. She had stopped at the window because the light was on inside, and there were 2 voices instead of 1. And something about the register of that second voice made the back of her neck go cold before her brain had even caught up. She had stood there in the rain for what felt like a very long time. Then she had walked to the front door and used her key. And that was when everything unraveled. Dax Whitmore had not expected her home until 9. He told her this calmly, while Miriam Solis, 26 years old, a contract paralegal at his firm, wearing Solène's anniversary gift to herself, a cream cashmere wrap that had been draped over the bedroom chair that morning, sat on the kitchen counter eating grapes from the fruit bowl and watching the conversation with a flat, satisfied expression. "You're early," Dax had said, as though that were the issue. As though Solène had committed the violation. She had not raised her voice. She had not thrown anything, though the fruit bowl was right there, and the impulse moved through her, like a current. She had set the dry cleaning on the hall table, very deliberately, and she had said, "Miriam, I'd like you to leave, please." And Miriam had looked at Dax, a private look, the kind that passes between 2 people who have rehearsed this moment, and Dax had said, in the tired, irritated voice he usually reserved for explaining investment logic to clients he considered slow, "Actually, Solène, I need you to go upstairs and give us a minute." The room had gone very still. She had looked at her husband, really looked at him the way you look at a word you've seen 1,000 times and suddenly cannot parse, and she had said, quietly, "This is my house, Dax." His response had been swift and surgically designed to reduce her. He had told her the house was in his name. He had told her the mortgage, the utilities, the car insurance, the quarterly tax on the investment property they owned jointly in Scottsdale. All of it ran through his accounts, his income, his signature. He had told her that her MBA she'd deferred when their daughter was born, the consulting career she'd put on hold, when he relocated the family to Portland for a promotion she'd never been consulted about. None of that constituted a financial contribution. He had said the word dependent without flinching. And then he had said, "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you this for months. I want a divorce. Miriam and I are going to spend the weekend at the Scottsdale property. By the time I'm back, I'd like you to have thought seriously about the logistics of transitioning out." Transitioning out of her own life. Miriam had slid off the counter then and walked to the refrigerator and poured herself a glass of water like a woman standing in her own kitchen, completely at ease, entirely unconcerned with the earthquake occurring 3 feet away. Solène had asked one question. "Did you put anything in writing?" Dax had stared at her like she'd spoken in a foreign language. And then he had taken her by the elbow. Not roughly, but in the controlling proprietary way he had cultivated over 11 years of marriage, the way that never left a mark. And he had walked her to the front door and told her she needed air. The deadbolt had turned from the inside. She had sat down on the top step of the porch, in the rain, in her coat, and she had listened to her own pulse for a long moment. The street was quiet. The neighbors' lights were on. A dog was barking 2 houses down. Everything was perfectly ordinary. And Solène Marchetti, who had once spent 18 months restructuring the supply chain for a medical device company while pregnant, unacknowledged on the final report because Dax had submitted it under the firm's letterhead, sat in the rain and let herself feel the full shape of what had just been done to her. Then she got up and walked to the car. To understand what Dax Whitmore had actually done, you would need to understand the very precise architecture of what he believed about his wife. He had met Solène 11 years ago at a conference in San Francisco. She had been working as a senior operations consultant for a boutique firm and had given a presentation on logistics efficiency that 3 senior partners in the room told her later was the best they'd heard all year. Dax had been one of them. He had found her at the reception afterward and told her she had a remarkable mind. He had meant it as a compliment. He had not understood then that her mind was the least remarkable thing about her. Solène's mother, Renee Marchetti, had emigrated from Lyon with $40 and a degree in biochemistry, and had built a quietly formidable diagnostics company over 30 years of work that Solène had grown up watching with the same careful, absorptive attention she brought to everything. The company was private, deliberately, painstakingly private. No public filings, no press releases, no industry profiles. Renee had a pathological wariness of visibility. She had been cheated by a partner early in her career and had never forgotten the lesson. Everything was documented, layered, protected, and held at arm's length from anyone who might one day decide they were entitled to it. When Renee died 4 years into Solène's marriage, she left her daughter 2 things: a letter and a controlling interest in Marchetti Diagnostics, held through a holding entity in Delaware that appeared, on paper, to be a minor investment trust belonging to a Swiss asset management group. Dax had attended the funeral and sent flowers to the office. He had never once asked Solène what the estate consisted of. He assumed, because he had always assumed, that the financial substance of their life together was his. He was wrong about nearly everything. The house on Clearwater Drive had been purchased with a down payment that came, ultimately, from a Marchetti subsidiary. Solène had arranged it quietly, efficiently, through a property trust registered to her mother's estate, because at the time, Dax had been carrying significant exposure from a series of overextended client positions that should have disqualified him from the mortgage, but didn't, because Solène had quietly backstopped the application through a third-party guarantor company that no one at the bank had looked at too carefully. She had done it without telling him, because she had known, even then, that the information would not be received with gratitude. Men like Dax received assistance as an insult, and they punished you for it later. She had protected him. For 11 years, she had been protecting him. The car was a white Volvo wagon, 7 years old, the kind of car that registers to no one, that blends into the school pickup line and the grocery store parking lot, without creating a single memorable impression. It had been her mother's car, transferred to her quietly at probate. Dax found it embarrassing and said so often. He drove a black Audi and told her repeatedly that the Volvo made them look like they were struggling. She got into the Volvo and pulled the door shut and sat in the silence. The rain was loud on the roof. The windows fogged almost immediately. She turned the heat on and sat with her hands flat on her thighs and breathed, slowly and carefully, the way she had trained herself to breathe, in the years after her mother died, when grief and the particular loneliness of a marriage to a man who finds vulnerability inconvenient would sometimes rise up at odd moments in the middle of ordinary days. 11 years. She had been good at this life. She had been so genuinely, quietly good at all of it. The dinner parties, the school logistics, the invisible management of every social and domestic system that allowed Dax to move through his days like a man unburdened by anything as tedious as reality. She had done it because she had loved him once, and then she had done it because she had believed, for longer than she should have, that the man she'd married was still in there somewhere beneath the ambition and the arrogance. Tonight had answered that question. She reached into her coat pocket and took out her phone. She opened her contacts and scrolled past her daughter's school, the pediatrician, the dry cleaner. She opened a secondary app, plain gray icon, no label, that required a 6-digit code followed by a thumbprint. The app connected to a secure server maintained by a firm in Zurich that Renee had used for all sensitive communications in the last decade of her life, and that Solène had maintained quietly out of a habit she couldn't quite bring herself to abandon. She placed a call. It rang twice. The voice that answered was a woman's. Low, precise, and entirely unhurried. "Solène, it's late." "Francesca," she said. There was a brief pause, the specific pause of a person who is not surprised but is taking a moment to calibrate. Francesca Lau had been Renee Marchetti's chief legal strategist for 19 years, and had continued, at Solène's request, in a quiet advisory capacity after the inheritance. She was 61 years old. She had never, in Solène's memory, raised her voice. "The house?" Francesca asked. "He locked me out. He's filing for divorce. He's been moving money. I've seen the transfers, small ones, over the past 8 months, into an account I can't access from our shared dashboard. He thinks I don't know. How much time has he had to prepare?" "He's been planning this for at least 6 months," Solène said. She pressed her thumb to the foggy window glass, leaving a clear oval. "I should have moved faster. I underestimated how serious he was." "You were trying to save the marriage," Francesca said, with the measured neutrality of someone who has observed many intelligent women make this same choice and has learned not to assign blame. "What do you want, Solène?" She thought about Miriam Solis sitting on her kitchen counter eating her grapes. She thought about Dax's voice when he said the word dependent. She thought about her mother, who had rebuilt her entire professional life from $40 and a biochemistry degree and a granite-deep refusal to be made small. "I want him to understand what he married," she said. "Not who." "What?" "Understood," Francesca said. There was a soft click of a keyboard beginning. "I'll start with the asset review. The property trust documentation is already with our records, so the house situation can be resolved through standard notice. For the financial accounts, the Scottsdale property," Solène said. "He's going there this weekend with her. He mentioned it in front of me, which means he's confident. He thinks I have no leverage." Francesca was quiet for a moment. "The Scottsdale property is held jointly. He can occupy it without your consent, but he cannot liquidate it without your signature. And as of tonight, I can place a legal hold on any attempted transfer or sale." "Done." "The firm accounts," Solène continued. "He's a partner at Whitmore Crane. Look at the client fund transfers over the past 14 months. He's been skimming. Not enough to trigger an internal audit, but enough to matter. I've been watching the pattern for a while." "You have documentation?" "I have screenshots. I have transfer records from the shared account that show timing discrepancies. I can send everything in the next 20 minutes. "Send it now," Francesca said. "I'll have our forensic team begin mapping the transfers tonight. If the pattern holds, this becomes a bar association matter, not just a divorce proceeding." Solène let out a slow breath. "What about her?" "The woman he's been seeing. She works at the firm on contract. If she received any benefit from improperly diverted funds, dinners, travel, accommodation, she's materially connected to the misconduct," Francesca said. "We document it. We let the bar association make the determination." "She's 26, Solène said. Not because it was relevant, but because she wanted to say it out loud, to hear how small the number sounded. "She made choices," Francesca replied, without emotion. There was a long pause. The rain was easing slightly, shifting from a roar to a steady percussion against the hood. "The house," Solène said finally. "Tonight. I want him to know tonight." Francesca typed. "I can have a formal notice of legal claim faxed to the property address within the hour, via the trust's registered agent. It won't be an eviction. He'll have to be served formally for that, which takes a few days. But it will make clear, in writing, with documentation attached, that the property is held under a trust in which he has no standing interest. He'll know tonight that the house isn't his. The rest will follow." "Do it," Solène said. There was a sound on the other end. Not typing, but something more deliberate. The sound of a woman who has been waiting for this instruction for some time and is satisfied to finally receive it. "I'll send a car for you," Francesca said. "You shouldn't be sitting in a parking situation on a wet street." "I'm on my own driveway," Solène said. "Then stay warm. This won't take long." The line went quiet. Solène set the phone on the passenger seat and looked through the rain-fogged windshield at the house. The living room lights were on. She could see the faint flicker of the television through the curtains. Dax had apparently decided to make himself comfortable. The kitchen light was still on, too. Miriam's rental car was parked at an angle in the driveway, slightly blocking the garage, the way a person parks who assumes they will be staying a while. Solène watched the lights. She thought about the first house they had rented together, a one-bedroom in the Hawthorne district, back when Dax was still an associate, and they used to eat dinner sitting on the floor because they hadn't bought a table yet. She had been so happy then, in that apartment, with its sloped ceiling and the radiator that knocked all winter, and the view of exactly half a bare maple tree. She had thought that was what love was. Two people in an insufficient space figuring it out together. She was not sad, exactly. She was something harder and colder and more precise than sad. She was clear. Inside the house, Dax found the letter, slipped under the front door at 10:47. He almost missed it. He had been in the living room with Miriam, who had decided that the best way to process the evening's events was to open a second bottle of the good wine and watch something on Netflix. Dax had been distracted, more distracted than he'd expected. He had anticipated that asking Solène to leave would feel like resolution. Instead, it felt like a loose thread he hadn't quite found the end of. He saw the envelope on the hall floor when he went to get his phone charger from the entry table. His name was printed on the front in plain block letters. Beneath it, the return address was a Delaware legal firm he didn't recognize. He opened it in the kitchen. He read it twice. The document was 7 pages, dense with legal language, but clear in its essential argument. The property at the Clearwater Drive address was held in full by the Marchetti Family Property Trust, a legal entity registered in 2019 and maintained by a Delaware-registered law firm, acting as agent for the trust's sole named beneficiary. The down payment on the property had been sourced entirely from trust funds. The monthly mortgage, which Dax had been paying from his personal account for 6 years, and which he had considered among the more concrete proofs of his own industry and success, had been deposited each month directly into an escrow account controlled by the trust. None of those payments had been applied to a traditional mortgage held in his name. There was no such mortgage. There had never been one. He had been making payments for 6 years to an account that belonged to his wife. He read the last paragraph 3 times. It stated that the trust's registered agent had been formally notified of Mr. Whitmore's stated intention to dissolve the marriage, and that as sole beneficiary, Miss Marchetti Whitmore had authorized the agent to initiate proceedings to clarify the property's legal standing as a trust asset, which was not subject to marital property division under the applicable jurisdiction's statutes governing separately held trust property. The house was not marital property. It had never been marital property. Dax set the letter down on the marble island. Marble Solène had chosen, Solène had ordered, Solène had argued with the contractor about for 3 weeks until he got the seam placement exactly right, and he stood very still for a moment. "What is it?" Miriam called from the living room. He didn't answer. He picked up his phone and called his attorney. The call went to voicemail. He called the firm's after-hours line. An answering service told him that no one was available until Monday morning. He called his personal accountant. Also voicemail. He opened his laptop and went to the joint investment account he and Solène maintained, the one with approximately $340,000 in diversified holdings that he had been quietly intending to liquidate in stages into his personal account over the next several months in preparation for the divorce. He had already begun the process. He had moved $60,000 the previous week. The account balance was 0. Not locked, not frozen, 0. There was a single line of transaction history at the top of the ledger, time-stamped 11 minutes ago. Transfer authorized by account holder S. Marchetti Whitmore. Funds transferred to Marchetti Trust Escrow Account per legal instruction ref. 2024 MFT 17. She had moved it. All of it. Everything remaining in the joint account, legally, using her own authorization. Which she had, because it was a jointly held account, and she was a joint holder, and she had simply done what he had been planning to do, only faster and with documentation. Dax closed the laptop. Miriam appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding her wine glass, wearing Solène's cashmere wrap. She looked at his face and her expression shifted. "What happened?" He shook his head. "Dax." She set the glass down. "You're scaring me." "What happened?" he told her. He told her about the letter and the trust and the account. He watched her expression change as she understood that the penthouse he had promised her, the weekend in Scottsdale he had booked using funds from the client account, which he had been so certain was invisible, was not what she had been told it was. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was very flat. "You told me the house was yours. I believed it was. You told me the money you were moving was your bonus." He said nothing. She set the wine glass down carefully, the way someone sets something down when they are thinking about throwing it but have decided, just barely, not to. And then she said, "I want to go home." "Miriam." "I said I want to go home, Dax." Her rental car keys were on the kitchen counter. She took them. She walked to the guest room where she had left her overnight bag. Solène's guest room, with Solène's carefully chosen linen bedding, and the small watercolor above the dresser that Solène had bought at a street market in Portland 6 years ago. And she came back to the kitchen with the bag on her shoulder, and she walked out the back door without another word. Dax heard the rental car start. He heard it back out of the driveway. He stood alone in his kitchen, in a house that was not his house, and he tried to find the solid ground of his own certainty, and it was simply gone. He was standing in the middle of a structure he had believed, for years, was built on his competence and his drive, and his particular talent for knowing the value of things. And the structure was still standing. The marble was still solid beneath his feet. The kitchen was still beautiful. Nothing had fallen, or broken, or made any sound at all. But none of it was his. He walked to the living room and looked out the front window, and he saw the white Volvo still sitting at the curb. The engine was off now. The car was dark. But it was there. He thought about what Solène had said when he walked her to the door. She had not said anything, actually. She had not pleaded or argued or cried. She had looked at him for one moment, a specific kind of look that he recognized, distantly, as the one his mother had given him once when he was 12. and had done something genuinely cruel, and then immediately tried to charm his way out of it. And then she had walked through the door he was holding open. He had thought that look meant she was defeated. He went to the front door and opened it. The rain had slowed to a light mist. The street was quiet and orange-lit and entirely ordinary. He walked down the porch steps and across the wet lawn, his dress shoes sinking slightly into the soft grass, and he stopped at the curb next to the white Volvo. He could see her inside. She was in the driver's seat. She appeared to be reading something on her phone, the screen illuminating her face. She looked perfectly calm. She looked like a woman who has been sitting quietly in the middle of a hurricane she designed, and is simply waiting for the rotation to complete. He tapped on the window. After a moment, it came down. The inside of the car was warm, and it smelled faintly of the lotion she had always used, something with bergamot that he had never noticed he associated with safety until this moment, standing in the mist, realizing that he had given that up. "Solène," he said. She looked at him. She did not say his name back. She did not make his presence easier. "The house isn't mine," he said. He hadn't meant to start there, but it came out first. "No," she said. "The account is empty, yes." He put his hand on the door frame. He had spent 11 years in rooms where he was the most prepared person present, and he had built an entire identity on that fact, and he had absolutely nothing right now. "I didn't know," he said, and he meant the trust, the house, all of it. He meant that he had not known who she was. "You didn't ask," Solène said. Her voice was completely level. "You decided what I was on the day you met me, and you never updated the file." She paused. "That's not a flaw in your intelligence, Dax. It's a flaw in your character." He looked at her for a long moment. There was nothing in her expression that resembled the woman he had walked to the door an hour ago. Or perhaps she had always looked like this, and he had simply never been in a position that required him to see it. "Where will you stay?" she asked. The question was not unkind. It was the question you ask someone at the end of a conversation, when all the significant things have been said. "My brother's," he said after a moment. "Maybe." "Okay," she said. She reached for the window button. "Solène." She stopped, waited. He had been about to say something. He wasn't sure what. An apology, maybe. Or some version of the speech he had spent months crafting in his head about needs and growth and the honesty of it all. But standing on the wet street in front of a house he had believed was his, looking at a woman who had spent 11 years making his life run smoothly, while quietly holding a legal framework that could have dismantled him at any point and had simply chosen not to. He understood that no version of that speech was adequate. "Good night, Dax," she said. The window came up. She sat in the Volvo for a while after he went back inside. She watched the upstairs light come on. The guest room, not the master. She watched him move around up there, the shadow of him crossing the window. She thought about her daughter, who was at her grandmother's house this weekend, and who would need to be told things, carefully and truthfully in the right order, and who was 11 years old and resilient in the particular way of children who have had a mother who made them feel safe. She thought about her mother's kitchen in Lyon, which she had visited only once, as a child, a kitchen with green tiles and a window over the sink, and the smell of something always on the stove. She thought about $40 and a biochemistry degree and a granite refusal. She started the car. She did not look back at the house as she pulled away from the curb. She had a room at a hotel 6 blocks away. She had booked it 2 weeks ago, quietly, on a separate card. When she had seen the 4th unexplained transfer in the joint account and understood that she was not being paranoid, but simply accurate. She had a bag in the trunk. She had a meeting with Francesca on Monday morning and a call with her daughter Sunday afternoon, and a list in her phone of things to do this week that was longer than it had ever been and felt, for the first time in a very long time, entirely her own. The streetlights moved over the windshield in slow, even intervals. Solène Marchetti drove through the quiet neighborhood streets with both hands steady on the wheel, and she did not feel victorious. She felt something more precise than that. Something that had no clean name but lived in the body as a kind of stillness, the way a long-held breath feels when you finally release it. She felt for the first time in 11 years like the full dimensions of herself were occupying the same space at the same time. The women who understand their own worth rarely need to announce it. They simply stop protecting people from the consequences of underestimating them. And when they finally do, when they stop absorbing the cost of someone else's willful blindness and let the bill come due, the reckoning arrives not with fire or fury, but with the quiet, irresistible authority of something that was always true, finally spoken aloud.